This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we are joined by special guest Alonzo Felder, author of Discovering A.S.J. Allen. Over the course of his 37-year formal career as an IT analyst at Duke University, Alonzo became an expert in a number of research methods and has done extensive work on his own family history. In retirement, his work includes promoting the importance of family history and honoring ancestors. Alonzo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
And if you have anything else, I mean, this whole conversation is kind of about your family and your legacy, and so I think this whole conversation will be about that. But if there's any other details you just want to immediately add to what I said, feel free to share a little bit more about your maybe immediate family.
Oh, that sounds great. That intro was wonderful, Brent. My immediate family, I'm living here in Durham, North Carolina. I've been married to my wife, Francine, for over 40 years, and which is a real testament to her. And we have two adult children, just up the number of grandchildren. I now have 5 grandchildren. So if you look in the front of the book, you'll see I have it dedicated to my 3 grandsons. Going to have to do something about that because now I have 2 granddaughters, both born on the same day just a couple weeks ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are beautiful little tidbits that become a part of our story.
Absolutely.
I got this email from Alonzo. I don't know how, it was a while ago. And one of those emails saying, hey, I have this book. I didn't know if you would be interested in reading. His email was very aware. You know, I know you get sent a lot of books, and I do. And every time I get on here doing these interviews, I complain about it. And here I am again. And yet, Alonzo had this book about what it was like to, the title Discovering A.S.J. Allen, to discover those that had come before you, your predecessors. I don't know if ancestors feels like too much of antiquity buried into that, but those that have come before you and experiences as Black community in we'll talk a little bit more about what this means, but Reconstructionist era. And I thought, this is the kind of stuff I'm trying to read more of. This is the kind of stuff I'm trying to surround these are the kinds of people and the kinds of voices that I'm wanting to, they're not present enough in my life. And so I said, yes, I actually do want to read your book and send me a copy. And then the book came in the mail and it was big. It was, how many pages here? It was 300 of content, another 100 of appendix and everything else. But man, it was just a ton of fun doesn't feel like it was good. It was a good read on so many levels I did not expect. I was expecting some things. I wasn't expecting others. But let me ask you this, Alonzo, how'd you know about me? I met you via email. How did you get to know Bama or Brent or I, or what's your connection there that prompted you to send that email?
Well, for a number of years, I led or co-led a grief support group at my local congregation for people who had experienced or were experiencing loss due to death, primarily death in their families. And I had this one participant in a grief support group that I was delivering. She was a woman. I've literally known her most of her life. I knew her parents, and she was in class because she was preparing for the upcoming death of her father. And that was a complex relationship. There was just a whole bunch of stuff going on all at the same time. But she was going through this grief process with such courage and strength. And when she would make comments in the class, everybody would just stop and listen. And she and I would end up talking afterwards, sometimes for an hour or more after the class was over. And I could tell that the text was doing something inside of her, that she was really doing a great job in dealing with this upcoming death, even though it was so incredibly difficult. And if you've ever been in a grief kind of situation, counseling situation, a lot of people want to throw out platitudes of, oh, he'll be in a better place. And the Bible says that he's going to blah, blah, blah. And none of that was coming out of her, but she was doing what I have come to learn now as text to context. Let's look at what was going on and why this was said and why it means so much. And I asked her, as we were talking, I would say, well, tell me, what are you doing? What kind of spiritual disciplines do you have? What are you learning? And she started talking about this guy, Marty Solomon, in this Bema discipleship podcast that she was learning just an incredible amount from. So I actually remember one specific night, class ended. It was about 9:00. I had an hour's drive to get home, got home, had dinner, kissed my wife, locked myself up in my office, and I listened to the first couple of episodes, and I was just blown away. I was hooked from the very beginning. And after that, my wife and I would start setting aside an hour after dinner every evening, and we would just listen to an episode. After the episode was over, Brent would come on and say, well, go ahead and meet with your discussion group and, put your questions and stuff out there. And we'd smile and we'd look at each other and go, hey there, discussion group. And we would talk.
Yeah.
And it's a wonder that we got any sleep or any rest, but we were so incredibly full to be able to see the scriptures in a new light and to understand them. So that's how I met you.
That is really beautiful to hear that. And yeah, just appreciate that story a bunch. And that means a lot, but absolutely. Brent, what do you got?
Well, maybe you can get us started discussing your book and just kind of give us a little bit of an overview, a synopsis, whatever. I think, the
Sure.
text to context thing that you were just talking about is a theme that I saw come up in your book in many places. So,
absolutely. Well,
give us a little bit of an overview.
So the one thing that I sort of like to start with is this idea of looking at the text and being familiar with it, being obedient to it, being submissive to it. And you don't have to read very many pages into the word before you get to these 10 words in this whole concept of honor your father and mother. And we know it from our Judeo-Christian background as, one of the 10 commandments. But the fact is, 23 of the world's major religions have a similar or even identical text, that it is important to honor the people who created you. It's important to give honor and reverence to your mother and father. Well, a part of me wanting to do that is you can't, I came to the conclusion, you can't honor what you don't know. So I knew so very little about who made me and where I came from. I knew the immediate, mom and dad kind of situation, but I didn't know a whole lot before that. And it sort of hit a zero state for me when my mom passed away. I remember we had the funeral, everything was over with her, dealing with her passing. And I remember walking into the living room, looking at my wife and my 2 kids, and it hit me like a ton of bricks that those 2 children sitting on the floor were my legacy. I'm an only child. My mom was an only child. So there's not like, cousins and uncles and aunts and other kinfolk around. It was me and these 2 little creatures on the floor that shared my DNA. And I just didn't know what to give them in terms of family story. So I was sort of bemoaning this to a friend of mine, and he said, "Well, what can you do about it?" And I said, "Well, there's a cemetery down in Florida, Gainesville, Florida, Alachua, where I don't care where we end up in the world, it seems like everybody goes back to this one cemetery for burials. I have spent my entire life going to funerals and seeing people put into the ground there in Gainesville." I said, "I think I want to walk among the tombstones. I want to go back and kind of get to know my people." And he looked at me and said, "Okay, when do you want to go?" And it was road trip on at that moment. And after going down there and sort of roaming around, I did a lot of discovery there, came back home and started looking up some of the names. One of those names was A.S.J. Allen. I'm named after him. He's Albert Sidney James Allen. My middle name is Albert. And I always knew that it was my grandmother's daddy that I'd been named after. Had a picture of him, but I didn't know anything about him because my family would never talk about him. All we knew, or at least all I knew, is that sometime, long time ago in the Jim Crow South, he was murdered by a white guy. And that was it. So I started doing some Google searches and other things, and that's when I started to make this discovery of this bigger than life African American preacher, teacher, farmer there in the Alachua County area who did so much to build community, was killed by the neighbor over a border dispute. And you would think that would be the end of it. Sad to say, but true. In 1904, if you killed a black guy and you're white, it's sort of akin to running over a squirrel right now. You may stop or you may not. It's justifiable homicide. You just keep going. Well, that didn't happen with my great-grandfather. And I learned that people showed up, like 800 people plus showed up to attend his funeral. After that, the community comes together, raises funds, and they hire 2 attorneys to take the shooter to court. And I'm thinking, okay, I know a little bit about history. There's this place called Rosewood. There's Tulsa. There's all these places in American history that if black people don't like the way things are going and they say something about it, then they burn your town down. You lose your life. Bad things happen when you push up against that establishment. What was it about my grandfather that allowed such agency in the community around him? And I started reading about the things he'd done in life, and I was absolutely blown away. So that's what started this journey. I had no idea I was writing a book. I was just enamored over this man that I was named after.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned you started with this, honor your father and mother conversation. But even beyond that, like, it strikes me that you don't even have to get that far. You're only a couple pages into your Bible before you run into these things we call genealogies. And
yes.
And what is this but a record? And a large part of your book is it's honoring your predecessors and honoring A.S.J. Allen through record keeping, through the physical work of genealogy. And I loved that connection as well. What was that process like? So you've talked about what was it like inside of you? I imagine, I think you speak to this towards the end of the book, but like, there had to have been a whole mixture and a range of not just feelings and emotions, but it's one thing to discover something new. It's one thing to find a topic and almost like a hobby, dig into or study or research. It's got to be something else when it's so intimately connected to your identity, your namesake. What was that process like internally for you?
It was a transformative process. One of the things that I later discovered in just looking at the history is that family stories, cultural stories have the ability to transform and to change you, because when you read history and you see yourself, you see your people in that story, then it's your story. Then it's intimate. Then it's about who we were and where we were and what we were doing. And one of the things that happens as a result of making that connection is you have outcomes that are really desirable. So I go back to the way that the command is structured. Honor your father and mother. Why? So that it may be well with you. Well, this whole idea of wellness opened up on my horizon as I was doing this research, because I personally started experiencing, as we say, a pep in your step. I started feeling really good about myself. I come from people. There's some dignity about the people who preceded me. And when I looked into the science, I see there's a couple folks I mentioned in the book, Marshall Dukes, Robin Fivish down at Emory University in the Family Narratives Lab, looking at the Do You Know scale, and essentially finding that children, adolescents especially, who know the story, know what it happened to their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, these kids perform so much better in academics, so much better in life, less incidences of depression, of anxiety. They're less likely to be gang members and to have criminal activity in their lives. There's so much in terms of positive outcomes of wellness that comes together when you actually know who your people are. And I found that, firsthand. It was just incredible that as I was researching my own family, there was a sense of pride and dignity that I started to feel about myself. And, oh man, I started channeling my grandmother, with my children. It's like, hey, tuck your shirt in, stand up straight, you got people. You're not just run-of-the-mill everyday humans, you're special. And you really start feeling that.
Right.
So I don't know if that answered. That might have been a ramble. Sorry.
No, that was great. So I would imagine, as you set out, you weren't thinking from the very beginning that you were going to write a book about this.
Oh no.
So what was your evolution of thought there? Like, did you get all this research and then you looked at it and you're like, well, this would be helpful. Maybe I should publish a book. Or did you get to the point where you're like, I don't feel like I have it all together yet, but I feel like more people should be doing this kind of work, and I want to turn this into something that would be helpful. Like, what was the process that got you to the point where you're like, I need to do something that I can publish and provide as a resource to others?
Oh, guys, this was a classic case of a beggar finding food. I could not believe what was transforming and happening in my own life. And quite honestly, I always thought of myself as a pretty normal, happy childhood, great, friends and family. I didn't see myself from a victim mentality. I didn't see myself as lacking. And I thought, if I can start feeling this way as a result of what I'm learning, what would this do to other people? They don't know what they're missing. And that's really why I decided to go the book route. Is there was no way I could contain this and not share it.
Oh gosh, I love that. Throughout the book, you talked about this scale you mentioned just a moment ago, this DYK scale, the Do You Know scale. And there's all these questions. Do you know stories from your parents' childhood? Do you know this about where where the house that your parents lived in? Just all these questions that are a part of this. And these aren't just this is from an actual scale that you reference from these two names down at Emory University. And I just found that whole thing so moving because two things happened. A, I really appreciated the fact that for a large majority of those questions, I did know a lot of those things about my own life, and I was able to appreciate the impact that had had on my own emotional, just mental well-being, my own psychological development, all the things. But it wasn't that long ago. Our organization was using Lisa Sharon Harper's Very Good Gospel, kind of a racial justice training boot camp, and we had gone through that, and I had had our kids sit through some of the videos in that boot camp. I have some adolescent children. And one of the conversations that we talked the most about that we had never considered was, if you come from a Black community, you don't have, it's easy for me to jump on and get a genealogy. It's easy for me to trace down, but this DYK scale is not a given.
Right.
And all of a sudden I had this deep appreciation for, oh goodness, I was able to appreciate something I didn't even know I was benefiting from. Is that a part of why you wrote this book? Is that a part of this spiritual food that you talk about? Like, you wanted others to realize the value in, this isn't just about facts and data, but there is something. Is that part of what you were doing as you wrote this book?
Absolutely, because you're right. It's not about facts and data only. It's about the story. I like to sometimes refer to myself as a family historian or a family history enthusiast. I almost cringe when people refer to me as a genealogist, because so many times people use that word and it's just about the facts. And it's great to know if you're descendant from Charlemagne or whatever, to know the facts, or even to know the DNA. But what really makes this come alive for me is, do you know the stories? Do you know the context of the facts? Do you know how your folks met? Do you know where they lived? Do you know why they happened to move to that city so that you were born there? Because those are the things that are important. That's what makes the stories pop, is when you can know those things. And you mentioned there earlier, Marty, for a lot of people of color, those things aren't a given.
Right.
They aren't there because of a number of factors. One of the things I have to always keep in mind is I'm an old guy now. I'm in my 60s. So I literally have memories of sitting with my cousins on the farm, on the front porch, shelling peas, shucking corn, and listening to my grandmother and her sisters tell stories. Well, wake up. It's 2022. Nobody's sitting on a front porch shucking, corn anymore and telling stories. Grandma lives in a condo, not on, a farm somewhere. So we're in a different society. We're in a different context. And a lot of kids, they may not know their grandparents, or due to cultural and race-based sometimes situations, your grandparents may be just slightly older than your parents.
Right.
So we're not talking about someone who's relating a 20 or 30 year prior history, but maybe, someone who is more of a contemporary, and they just don't have the stories to tell you. So the idea of, being able to look to your family as a primary source and say, where did I come from? What were my people like? In some communities, you have to go a lot further than just mom and dad and maybe even grandma. So that's why I wanted to make this book somewhat of a resource and a guide tool so that you can go further in being able to find out a couple of generations back. I always like to tell people, know the last 100 years. That's not really that long.
Yeah.
Know that much.
Yeah. It made me even think about the way I tell my own story to my own children. Like, I think I get so worried sometimes about telling my story on Instagram or YouTube. Because when I think about my parents, I know the story of how they started dating. They were next door neighbors. My dad was actually dating my aunt. She wasn't there one night and stood him up, and my mom was in there, and my dad started taking. I know that story. I know that my dad, didn't really like school. The only class he liked was wood shop, and he raced cars and got in trouble. And I'm not like any of those things, and yet knowing that story is somehow deeply a part of me.
Absolutely.
And so now I'm going, man, do I actually share my own stories with my own kids? It was just such a gift to see that through your book, and I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I was really struck by this scale as well. I wrote down every single question, and I'm sure there's an easier way to find this list. But
you can go to my website.
There you go. Well, I wrote them all down because, especially as you were talking about like that situation where you don't have the time, just the raw, like, okay, we've got 2 hours worth of slicing and dicing and other things to do, and we're just going to have these conversations that naturally come up. Like, we just don't have that anymore. And I told my wife, I was like, look, I don't think we should or can even change what our parents are doing with their lives. But if we can intentionally create some spaces to have these conversations, I think it's really important for our boys. Absolutely. And, I think hopefully I can take these questions, and I think same for me. I do know most of the answers, but there are some that I don't know, and I would rather capture them more intentionally now while they're available. So yeah, that whole conversation really kind of convicted me about the intentionality that I have with my own family.
We have the text telling us that we ought to be asking questions and telling stories as we walk along the way, when we sit, when we stand. The instruction from the word is that we need to be engaged in story as we go about life. And if life doesn't make that real easy and opportune for you, I love what you're saying there, Brent. Make it happen. Somebody's going to have to do the dishes. Grab a grandchild, and we're going to get in there and we're going to wash up the dishes. And by the way, you're going to have to listen to me tell some stories again about when I was in high school or when I was in elementary school. I love boring my children to death with these things. But what's fun is I eventually got to a point where I could eavesdrop on my children, and they're telling my stories. And that's when you feel like, okay, I did a good job.
Yeah.
So going back to that idea of text to context, this book is, or ASJ's story at least, is kind of set in the Reconstruction era in Florida, and help the people out who are like me and who thought, as I was going through school, like, oh, history is boring. I don't care about this. Let me just get to my math class. I know the answer. It's all easy to figure out. And I just didn't pay attention to this stuff. So maybe some of us need a refresher on what the Reconstruction era is. And, that idea of like getting into the minds of the people of the time and trying to sort out the details and being able to read those news reports and say like, okay, well, they said this, and to me that means something, but what did it mean to them? And talk about that a little bit.
Sure, gladly. So Brent, as you remember, the American Civil War took place from 1861 to 1865. You remember that?
I mean, barely. That's probably the only thing I could tell you, really.
So the Civil War breaks out, and it goes on for that stretch of time. And I think most of us get a introduction, at least, to the Civil War as we're going through school. But I find it interesting that so many people ask the same question of, wait a minute, Reconstruction, what's that? So there was this thing called the Compromise of 1877 that happened. And after the Civil War, there was this period where the United States government said, we messed up. And we need to redress the political, social, economic legacies of slavery because we've done something and we've really dirtied our hands here, and we need to do something about that. So during this period of time, we get 3 amendments to the Constitution, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. And these freedoms are being granted to newly freed enslaved people. They're called freedmen. So you may have heard of the Freedmen's Bureau. The United States government goes ahead and says, listen, we really messed up here and we've got to fix this because we've had this period of time where we've not treated these people like people. We have not given them proper education. We have not given them proper housing. We've not given them tools. And when I say tools, I always, in my brain, I go back to the biblical narrative of when the Jewish people were freed from Egypt. What happens as they are getting out of that situation? Well, we read that they are loaded down with Egyptian wealth. They are going into the desert with stuff, and they're going to a physical promised land, to a place. So it's one thing to talk about, you're free. Just go do whatever you want to. You're free. You need tools in order to truly be free. You need to have some sort of economic, social, land, physical tools at your disposal if you're really going to live a free life. And that's what the country seems to have had on straight, at least for a little while. And during this Reconstruction period, you see Black men, women were not allowed to vote still for a lot of this period, but you see Black people voting. You have parts of the country where the Black population outnumbers the white population. So what happens when you end up taking that to the polls? You have hundreds of Black elected officials all over the country. And suddenly, you're in this situation where you see people who are eloquent, people who are educated, people who are full of agency for their people and wanting to do things better, to build back and to do things differently. You have your Joshua Walls, your Frederick Douglass, your people who we look at as, exceptional in our history books, but these people, yes, they were exceptional, but they also were sort of a product of their environment. This is what happens. This is what had happened. And you start seeing Blacks really coming in and being integrated into society. And it looked like everything was just going to be hunky-dory and life was going to go on. The Army was behind all of this. So you had the might of the federal government, the U.S. military. The Freedmen's Bureau had formed, and they were opening schools. They were opening banks. They were giving people the tools of finance, of education, offering loans to be able to make and build a new society here in America. But you probably can figure out that didn't last very long, because whites who had been in power and were used to being in power were looking at this whole situation of Reconstruction and going, wait a minute, I'm going to live in a country where the laws are made by people that I used to own, where the people who I used to whip are going to be the people that are writing the laws that I need to obey. And, then you have the rise of the Klan. Then you have a lot of Southern societies form that say, oh, this can't happen. We need to go back, and that's when you start getting black codes, Jim Crow laws, and things like this coming up. But there was a time before, after slavery and before black codes and Jim Crow, where society was actually trying to level itself out here in America.
Very good to be reminded of that. Or even, I never even had heard the term Reconstruction era. It was very helpful for me to have some handles for that. Another thing I appreciated as you wrote this book was your commitment to honesty, particularly about the story of A.S.J. Allen, what you could know, what you couldn't know. You acknowledged, obviously I have biases and obviously, but ultimately I don't know this or I don't know that. And you were very honest about it. You did not come, the book was very, there's a whole other part of this book. And it's about, it was very accessible. It came off as, not that you had some massive axe to grind, even though the story would warrant such a posture. And I'd only read your book. It wasn't until today I've even heard your voice, Alonzo. This is the first time we've actually been able to interact in person. But even today in your conversation, your voice, your posture, the book, it comes off as trustworthy, accessible. Has the book found a reach? Maybe that's been helpful to those outside just your immediate, has the book gone to places that maybe has surprised you, or have you heard feedback in that you find just so encouraging?
So right after the book came out, I was the book was published by the Florida Historical Society Press, and this past summer, the Florida Historical Society had their annual meeting. I was invited to come and be a part of a couple of panels and give a presentation there. I had no idea what to expect, Marty. So I'm an IT guy. Okay. I've worked in the medical center and in the university as the behind the scenes. I will make sure your computer is doing what it needs to do and your slides are coming up on cue. That's kind of who I am. And I found myself in Gainesville, Florida, in the middle of two major historical society conventions. Both were held at the same time. And I remember walking into the conference room where I was supposed to present. And there was my counterpart. There was a guy hooking up the computer and testing the mics and doing all this stuff. And so I did what I always do. I ran over next to him and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" and struck up a conversation. And I think we were probably the only two non-PhDs, within a 500-mile radius in a university town. And we're just sort of talking. And he's like, "Yeah, what are you going to do?" And it's like, "Well, I'm going to talk to all these historians who know far more than me about my grandfather." He goes, "You'll do great." And I give we have our panel discussion. I do my thing, and I'm sitting at the author's table out in the hallway when it's all over. And it was the most incredible thing. I had I think the most memorable were these tiny little old white elderly women. They bring their little walkers up to the table, and this one woman goes, "I am so glad you wrote this story. I want a couple of these books because I want my grandchildren to know." And I was blown away because I didn't expect that. I didn't know who would write or who would read. I didn't know what kind of responses. If I was in a hotbed of Confederacy that there was just going to tell me to, pack all these books up and get out of here. I didn't know what to expect. But what I found were people passionate about history, in this case, Florida history, who were buying up my books to give them to their children and grandchildren because they felt like the story had been hidden for way too long. And that was, very unexpected. The other similarly unexpected thing that's happened is I've had phone calls and letters from folks who have told me, you are channeling my family. My family also doesn't talk about this stuff. There's trauma in my history and it hurts. And even though it happened 100 years ago, nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to bring it up, but now we can, because now we have a guide for talking about it. So that's been really, good for me to see that kind of reach. I just did a talk last month at a little church group here in Durham, who they honed in on one particular chapter, one part of a chapter in the book on generational trauma. And what do you do when you have an ancestor who's been hurt and you find that you're experiencing some of these same reactions and symptoms, but you weren't even there? But you're having to deal with that hurt. And they wanted me to talk about the trauma. And afterwards, I thought it was going to be like an hour. Alonzo gets up and talks for an hour and sits down, goes, signs books and goes home. At the end of it all, this woman in the back of the room goes, well, wait a minute, we can't go now. Isn't there going to be a Q&A? And we were there for another hour. People want to know. People want to be able to get this stuff out. So that's been the result of this book so far. I don't know where it's all going to end, but it's been great.
Yeah, it's great. It's good to hear.
Yeah, the story itself of A.S.J. Allen is a really compelling story, but you have a huge portion of the book that's dedicated to the process of finding this information, the investigation, the discovery. And like, if you had asked me like, hey, Brent, do you know how to use Google? Do you know how to use the search operators and all this stuff? And I'm like, oh yeah, I got that stuff. But you walked through all the different things, and I learned several really cool tricks. So even a total nerd like myself has something to learn from this, I think. And just just laying out the wide variety of things that are even out there, some of which I was aware of, but there's so much, like the variety of marriage records. Like there's just so many different things. And so I think it's just a really good resource for anyone who's doing investigation into their own heritage. How did you, obviously you're an IT guy, so this is kind of like, it is your day job, I guess, but was it fun? Was it exciting? You talked about brick walls, like maybe share a couple of moments where you hit a brick wall and you were frustrated. You were doing this for decades. So like, oh yeah. Talk about the work of the investigation and discovery.
So the one thing that I like to think to talk about in some of my presentations is, if you decide to take up this mantle of family history research, couple things you should know. Do not believe what you see on television. This is not easy. You will not do this in a half an hour and end up with a book of life and just walk away and say, oh, I've done it. That was great. It's all behind me now. This thing will take over your life. And I mean that in the most literal sense. There have been plenty of nights that 3-4 o'clock in the morning, my wife gets out of bed, comes across the hall to my office and goes, are you coming to bed? Because I have been here since, 5 o'clock when I got home. Do I enjoy it? It's thrilling. Maybe I went into IT because I'm a puzzle solver. I love puzzles. I love a mystery. I love, looking for answers to problems. And if you want to find problems, just think about your family. Um, there are so many problems, in family history to be resolved, to be solved. And there are things that you don't know until you really get into the midst of it, and then new questions come up. So in thinking of, things that have kept me up really late or for days on end and trying to solve, I remember looking at a early census and seeing my grandmother and my grandfather on the census, but my mom wasn't there. And I'm doing the math and I'm thinking, okay, she'd been born. Why was she not there? And why were they in this different city? So they were in Miami. And I'm scratching my head going, I have never heard any stories about them being in Miami, and where was mom? What's going on? So I started doing some newspaper research to see, text to context. What's the context? What was going on in America, in Florida, in the 1920s? Well, it turns out that there was this whole land grab thing going on, and people were being lured into South Florida to buy cheap land and develop it. Well, you know what was happening when people were being lured into South Florida to buy cheap land and live there and to try to pump out the Everglades? You have to read with a journalistic eye. White people were being lured into South Florida. They needed cooks, maids, butlers, and a whole army of support people. And there's this whole other story that I discovered of African Americans moving from both the North and the South into Southern Florida because that's where the jobs were. That's where I found my grandparents. I look back into the Northern Florida census at my grandmother's sister, and guess who's living with her? My mom. They left her to go down for this, great, let's pump the Everglades, experience. But they were a part of that army of Black folks who moved down to Southern Florida in order to be the cooks and waiters and waitresses and, domestics of the time. So it's stuff like that that just made me want to go even more, because you're reading about your family's history, but you're also learning about the history of your community, of your country, of, your part of the country, and why they were doing the things they were doing. So that to me is what drove me. The other thing, I think you mentioned roadblocks. One of the major roadblocks that I had to overcome was just that of literacy. I am not the first generation college educated. My grandmother went to college. My ASJ worked to rebuild Cookman Institute, which is now Bethune-Cookman. He was a part of that whole educational scene back in the early 1900s. So our family's not been that, removed from that experience. But literacy was a major issue in my life. You learn to read, you learn to write, you learn to spell. When you start down this road of family history research, throw literacy out the window, because your ancestors did. They spelled phonetically. They spelled the best way they could. And if you're looking at certain records, say census records, it's not even the responsibility of the person being interviewed to get the spelling. The spellings often comes from what the enumerator hears. So I have To date, I think I have up to 11 spellings of my family name of Limbrick, which you think, wow, how in the world is it possible? But yes, it gets written in cursive and it looks one way. It gets printed, it's another way. Phonetically sounded out, it's something else. I have members of the same biological family, brothers and sisters, and they spell their last name differently. Literacy is one of those big ones that I had to overcome and just say, it is what it is. Do the research and make sure you still got the right family, and then move forward.
Yeah.
Kind of along the lines of like using terms, like different terms that were used for race at various points in history. And it's like, well, I'm not comfortable with that term today. Yes, but if you don't use that term in your search, you're not going to find what you're looking for. So
Yes.
yeah, lots of variables to consider.
And that's important when you're talking to people face to face or on the phone, when you have to have a live conversation. I'm not sure if I related the story in the book or not, but when you said that, Brent, it reminded me of being on the phone with an archivist down in Florida, and I'm trying to find church records on my great grandfather, and this woman is doing her best trying to help me to find the church and to find the membership rolls and all this, and we're coming up with nothing. And somewhere along the conversation, she detected, or I said, that he was an African American. And you could hear the gasp. And she just went, well, I need to be looking in the colored books. And it's like, okay, so there were different books. Yes, you need to talk. We need to talk to the archivist for the colored church. And it's like, wow, I forgot I was colored.
Yeah. There was the end of the book, especially had so much of that, just like things you would never think of. But once you mention it, you're like, oh gosh, of course, that would be the situation. You're like literacy. Oh yeah. Once you mention it, you're like, oh goodness, yes, that will. But you just would never think of it before. I got a couple. Just one of my last questions for you, Alonzo. I did a review of your book on Goodreads, and in the review, I said this. This book is a practical treasure trove, opportunities for reflection, a call for us to consider and learn from racism in our past, the learning of where culture has come from and where it still needs to go. It's a guide for research. It's a helpful aid in listening to and honoring your family. It's a great record of the power of knowing your own story. For some of us, knowing our story is easier than for others. It was inspiring to read about the work that Alonzo was willing to do to uncover more of his own. Would that portion of that review resonate with your intentions of this book, or how does that strike you?
Absolutely. And again, thank you so very much for that review. You nailed, you told me I nailed it, but you nailed it. That's what I wanted to happen with this publication.
Well, and it was, and all these things like wove into each other, but they also could stand on their own. Like there's so much about the research tidbits or and that has nothing to do with necessarily your family's backstory.
Right.
Obviously it's super, but this book was full of all kinds of stuff and stuff that could stand on its own, stuff that wove together for your situation. And it really surprised me. I was expecting one thing when you sent your book. I got like 5, 6, 7, 8 other things. And that was a beautiful, just wonderful surprise.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I go back to the analogy I made earlier. I was just a beggar who found food. This whole process of discovering my grandfather was so life-changing, and built so much into me that I wanted other people to experience that. And the only way for others to experience it is to have the tools to know, well, how do I start? Where do I start? What do I look for? And share, my journey. So that's, this has been great. This has been a great journey. It's not over yet. There's more to come. I've already started on another project. So, hopefully we'll get to talk about that later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think maybe people are a little bit intimidated by, it certainly can consume your life digging into this kind of stuff. But I also think like so many records are digitized now that were not easily accessible, especially if you live away from where your family is from. Now you can just, a personal example, a few years ago, I had an uncle who died, and I knew that he was with a lady when he died, but I didn't know if they were actually married or not. I wasn't particularly close to my uncle. And so I'm like 10, 15 minutes of searching, and I was able to pull up his marriage record from Missouri, me being in Idaho. And not only did I find out that he was married, I found out that it was his third marriage, which was one more marriage than I knew about. So, as you say, like every discovery leads to another question. And you can continue to follow that or not, but maybe give some encouragement for people who do want to learn more, but just feel a little bit like, there's too much work.
Yeah, well, there's a whole lot of work, and the problem is there's too much information. There's 101 free genealogical websites you can go to with someone telling you how to do this research. The record sources, not just talking to your family, but there's so many different types of records, of marriage records, of engagement records, of burials, of death certificates, of baptismal records. There's newspaper reports. It can be absolutely overwhelming. And one of the things that I do with the book is I try to condense these things down into sort of bite-sized chunks that you can pick a series or of records and focus in on that, and then see where you go. Stop, take a breather, go to a different series of records and see what you can come up with. There's so much that you can do, like you just mentioned, Brent, online, but there's things still here in the 2000s that you have to actually go to the county clerk's office. You will have to go to the church and get the church records. So not everything can be done from the comfort of your living room, but that's just an excuse to pack up your family and take the kids on a road trip and say, hey, let's go to this cemetery and let's take some pictures and, turn it into an adventure. The big thing that I always tell people is don't be intimidated by the volume of stuff that you will have to look at, but just start. Even baby steps are better than no steps. Do something. Decide this month, I'm going to focus just on newspapers. And I'm going to find everything I can about my family that's ever been reported on and go that route. But just do baby steps.
So you mentioned a moment ago, Alonzo, you had some stuff you're already working on some stuff. Like,
yes,
you mentioned you got some things in what kind of juicy little stuff can we be anticipating here? What can you tell us?
So a couple of things. One thing that I'm working on right now is putting together an online course that will take anybody from that state of just not knowing anything about their family history, where their origins, in step by step guiding them through how to use all the tools that I mentioned in the book to an end point of being able to have that experience of wellness and self-esteem, enlightenment and heightened knowledge about their family. So I want to do that because I know I can't keep doing this at the rate that I'm going. I can only be in so many airports at a time. I can only speak to so many people face to face, one to one, at a time. So I'm working on building a course that will allow people to do this at their own speed. The other thing that I'm working on is a documentary film type series, because I feel like something else has grown out of the book. When the book came out, it took about a month and a half or so, and I started getting contacted by other survivors. And what I mean by that, people who had experienced violent dyings in their family. And I feel like I've sort of formed a little club here of us who have ancestors who were killed due to racial violence, due to gun violence, due to, really horrible situations. And we have all chosen to deal with that loss, with that tragedy in some sort of artistic way. And I find that very interesting, that out of our lament, out of our trauma, out of our sorrow, we're all trying to find the beauty in that. So I'm looking looking at putting something together that shows weeping may endure for the night, but there is joy in the morning. And kind of guiding folks along that path of how to get from mourning, MOURNING, to joy.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. All right, Brent, take us home.
Yeah, Alonzo, where can people find you and get connected to you, reach out, be a part of the work that you're doing?
Gladly.
What kind of links can we include?
The easiest place to find me is I started a nonprofit called My Roots Foundation, all one word, myrootsfoundation.com. And you can find me there. In the upper left corner of that page, Brent, you will find the Do You Know scale. So,
Perfect.
But you can reach me there. There's an email link, alonzo@myrootsfoundation.com. I have a personal email address of alonzo.felder@gmail.com. So be able to find me there. Go on to Amazon, buy my book, send me a message, put in a good review.
Perfect.
Those are the places.
Love it.
All right. Well, we will definitely have all of those links, the book, the course, anything. I mean, even if those links aren't quite available yet, we'll get those in the show notes whenever they become available.
Okay.
And that'll all be at BayMondeception.com. If you want to get a hold of Marty, you can find him on Twitter at Marty Solomon. I'm at EIBCB. So thanks for joining us on the Bayamon podcast, Alonzo. It's been an absolute pleasure. Going on this journey. So
yeah, Alonzo, thank you for joining us today. It's been wonderful having you.
Oh, thank you. My privilege, my honor to be with you guys. You're doing a wonderful work, and you got to keep it up.
All right. And to all of our listeners, we will talk to you again soon. Postscript. So here I am, the day before this episode will be published. And I just got an email. I got an email from Alonzo a few days ago, and he was commenting on Reed Dent's recent episode on the unforgiving servant. And he started, quote, "Honestly, this lesson couldn't have come at a more inconvenient time," which to me is very funny. And I think our listeners probably know, because we typically record pretty far in advance. So Alonzo's episode was recorded 2 months ago, and I think maybe the funniest coincidence that we've ever stumbled into was when we released episode 124 on the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, contrasting it with Pilate's entrance that came out on the 4th of July of that year. I think most of you listening today probably didn't hear that in real time and probably didn't realize that was the day, but it's funny if you go back. So back to what Alonzo said. Quote, "This lesson couldn't have come at a more inconvenient time as we mourn the killing of Tyree Nichols. Having a discussion about forgiveness is easy when there's not a horrible offense sitting in the room. When the horror is right in front of you, it can be more uncomfortable to entertain the idea of forgiveness." End quote. And I would say that uncomfortable is a very gracious word to use there. He went on to share how there are similarities between Tyree and his own son as far as their interests and their personalities. And he takes the time to imagine on this very personal level what Tyree's parents are going through. But he goes on, quote, "My greatest takeaway from listening to your discussion on the unforgiving servant was your point of learning to see ourselves in the faces of offenders, to ask a better question, as Marty might say. Instead of looking at the 5 perpetrators and asking, 'What's wrong with you?' ask a better question. 'What happened to you?' In the moment, it's a hard question, but ultimately I have to lean into good theology and affirm that we were all created good and somehow have become twisted." End quote. So I just want to say that we aren't trying to say anything with this episode or Reed's episode on the unforgiving servant or any other episode. This was recorded weeks before Tyree Nichols was fatally beaten on the streets of Memphis. Reed's episode as well was days before the news broke. And why did we start with Reed's series on parables? Because Elle was having a baby and Josh was recovering from a liver transplant. There's no grand plan on our end of it. We aren't even smart enough to realize in December that we're recording an episode with a black man that will ultimately be released during Black History Month. Like, not just an episode with a black man, an episode about a black man's history. Like, we just simply had the opportunity to read his book, and we felt that it had value to our listeners for a variety of reasons. And there's no shortage of applications for these lessons. I'm afraid that the parable of the unforgiving servant will always be relevant. So the question is whether or not we're willing to step into the tension. So with that, I release you to wrestle with it. Thanks for listening. And I really mean that.